Tropical Storm Fred forms in the Caribbean, moving west past Puerto Rico this morning towards the southeastern United States. But where will it head, and will it strengthen or weaken on its way to the United States? The latest track, new forecast models, and a meteorologist Q&A coming your way here on Tracking the Tropics. Hey there, folks. Good morning to you. JB Biunno being joined here by WGNO meteorologist, Chief Meteorologist Hank Allen, joining us from New Orleans, Louisiana. Got a lot to get to here on this morning episode of Tracking the Tropics. Not really the most imposing system that we're tracking here as far as Tropical Storm Fred, but it's still going to hit the United States at some point this weekend based on the latest models that we have. We're going to get to your questions here in the Facebook Live comment section. You can use hashtag HeyHank. You see it underneath his name there on the right side of your screen, hashtag HeyJB, or hashtag HeyAmanda. For Tracking the Tropics meteorologist Amanda Holly standing by with the very latest. The 8 a.m. advisory, Amanda, coming in, but not too many changes in that 8 a.m. advisory.
No, we're still seeing a weak tropical storm at this point. And yes, notice we are saying tropical storm. Finally, we have a name with this. Finally, if that's a good term to use for you. But it finally got some good organization on the southern side. It has a closed center of circulation. So the storm itself was named last night as the 11 p.m. advisory. And now we are looking at it making its way past Puerto Rico toward the island of Hispaniola. And yes, notice before I move on to the next graphic, there is another area out in the Atlantic that we're keeping our eye on. Right now, it is not deemed an invest or anything like that, but I will talk about that in just a few minutes. For now, we're going to focus on Tropical Storm Fred. We've been calling it Fred to be for quite some time now. It is finally, again, got those maximum sustained winds at 40 miles per hour. Those maximum sustained winds, those tropical storm force winds, extend out about 45 miles from the center of the storm. And this morning, just kind of taking a quick look at satellite, it doesn't look all that impressive. Last night, it was kind of holding its own. Does look like it's weakened just a little bit when I, again, just look at satellite. There's got a couple of peaks of showers and storms developing right on the edge of Hispaniola there, and then near the southern section of these cloud tops. And I wanted to bring in Hank really quick to kind of get your idea. I know you've been on the air all morning long, kind of taking a look at this and dissecting it. What are your thoughts on the latest satellite look and kind of how it's breaking apart just a little bit?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not that impressive at all. You know, what's interesting is you do have some of those sort of wispy clouds around the outskirts of that convection there. And sometimes that wispiness indicates the system trying to strengthen a bit. But as you mentioned, you've got a couple of different areas of higher cloud tops there, and again, a couple of different sort of centers of stronger thunderstorm activity. You got a little gap forming in the middle there now. Not very impressive on the western side at all. And to me, you know, as we've talked about many times before with these weak systems, you know, you can get the center to sort of jump around a bit. So that's something I think we'll have to watch for over the next couple of days to see, does maybe that southern part of the convection take over maybe from where the center is right now, but definitely not looking that great at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. And Hank talked about, you know, this little gap starting to form here. This is what is exactly he's talking about. There's a cluster of storms starting to form near the island of Hispaniola, and then a cluster starting to form down here. And that's a big difference. That's going to make a big difference in the long run, because if the center forms a little bit farther to the south, maybe near where these thunderstorms are starting to pop up, that's going to mean a large shift in that track eventually. So weak storms, they just have a difficult time, especially near mountainous islands, and when dry air is trying to intrude, they have a difficult time trying to organize, and that's exactly what we're seeing right now. And the island of Hispaniola here, very mountainous, so as it makes its way off to the west-northwest here at 16 miles per hour, it is going to travel over this island, and that is going to further interrupt that center of circulation, so keeping it weaker in the near term. But if it stays off to the north of the Caribbean islands here, it is going to start to interact with some warmer water, and it will have the chance to slowly regain that strength. There's a look at the forecast models there. You saw they weren't in exactly some great agreement, especially as we get into Sunday and into Monday. There's a pretty large spread in the models, and the track here is going to note that. But I do want to walk you through the timing here. So this is right now, this is right where we're seeing the center, at least what we're depicting as the center at this moment. It's going to pass over the island of Hispaniola, 2 a.m. tomorrow. You can see the L's here. That means the National Hurricane Center thinks it is going to weaken as it moves over the island of Hispaniola. Maybe stay just to the north or kind of ride right along Cuba here by the time we get to Friday. As we get into Saturday, Sunday, and into Monday, that's when we would be talking about the United States impacts. Obviously, first starting here in the Florida Keys, maybe early Saturday morning, and then the storm would continue off to the northwest, maybe staying out in the Gulf of Mexico, still could be over the peninsula of Florida, and it could still be far enough out in the Gulf of Mexico that this could be a storm that Hank still needs to watch as well, and we would see very little impacts here in the Tampa Bay area. Regardless, at this point, I do think the Panhandle should certainly be watching this storm closely as well, because the latest models continue to suggest that we will see some sort of U.S. impact as we head into late in the weekend and into early next week. But that's the latest track. This is the 5 a.m. track from the National Hurricane Center, and it really hasn't changed all that much. We're still looking at the center of the cone staying just off of Florida's coast, but remember, the cone is this wide because the center of Fred could be anywhere within that cone. All right, let's talk about the challenges kind of that Fred has moving forward. The dry air has been one that we've been talking about from the beginning. It's been surrounded by this dry air. It's still surrounded by the dry air. So that's good news because that's helping to keep the storm a little bit weaker. It's helping to prevent that fast organization. So that's some good news, but you can still see there's plenty of tropical moisture in and around the center. So that's kind of what's helping keep it going. Now, if we look off to the north, staying with tropical moisture here, looking at the water vapor, we're looking over Florida at this point because there's actually a little bit of spin in the atmosphere over the state of Florida. This is an upper level area of low pressure that will eventually affect Fred as it moves a little bit closer. This upper level area of low pressure going to be weakening as it makes its way closer to us, but it could impede again that fast strengthening. So again, good news. The one thing that Fred does have going for it, it's August, and yeah, we have some very warm water temperatures well into the mid 80s, upper 80s right near the coastline. So that's going to help to help the storm strengthen as it makes its way just north of these islands. If it stays right over these islands, it's going to really have a hard time holding together. So this is what one model of the GFS run looks like. This is the latest model from the GFS. Again, every model that we get, again, it places the center just a little bit in different spots. So that's why we kind of really have to pay attention to that cone and know that the center could be anywhere within that cone. And this particular model with the GFS, you can see we're not seeing very closed, tight circulations here. So that means that it keeps Fred on the weaker side, again, because of all of those factors that we just talked about, the dry air, maybe the land interaction, and the interaction with that area of upper level low pressure. But you can see the heaviest rain here, the yellows and the oranges, still on the right side of the storm, the east side of the storm. So even if the center stays just off of our coastline here in the Tampa Bay area, we're likely going to get some of that squally weather come through, especially late Saturday and into Sunday. And then as we get into Sunday and into Monday, you notice how the circles kind of tighten up there just a little bit. That's indicating some strengthening, probably because it is over the very warm waters here. This is this is Sunday midday, and then after that, again, it makes its way off to the north. But again, this is probably going to be some impacts to the Tampa Bay area with those squally bands coming through, especially focused on Sunday with improving weather conditions on Monday. But again, a lot can change. If it takes a path that this particular model just said, we will see that squally weather. If it takes a path much farther out in the Gulf of Mexico, we may not get a whole lot at all. And same thing if it takes a much farther track to the right, to the east. We may not get that much impacts because, again, it looks like most of the showers and storms are going to be on that eastern side. So certainly something we're continuing to watch. I do recommend that everyone kind of pays attention every day as we head through the rest of the work week here. I think the bottom line, good news, it doesn't look like Fred is going to be very strong at this point, but as we always say, the intensity forecasts, they're notorious for being difficult to forecast. So we say plan for at least one category above what it is actually forecasting right now. National Hurricane Center does not have Fred becoming a Category 1 storm. Is that out of the realm of possibilities? No. So yes, we need to kind of pay attention to this as we head into the weekend. And quickly, before I get back to JB and Hank here, this is the other area that we are watching the National Hurricane Center, giving it a 20% chance in the next 2 days and a 40% chance in the next 5 days. And you can see it's going to take the same general general path that Fred has taken, and that's because of the steering currents. We've got the high pressure located near Bermuda, and on the southern edge of that high pressure, we've got those easterly winds that are coming from the east, pushing everything off to the west. So that's what we expect, exactly what we expect for the middle and late portions of August in the tropics. So I'm going to send it back on over to Hank and JB, and I'll come join you guys here in a few minutes.
No, you can send it back over to Fred. We might have a Fred on our weather team somewhere here across the company on tracking the tropics. Hank Allen, Chief Meteorologist, WGNO in New Orleans, joining us here. We're going to get to your questions here, folks, in the Facebook Live comment section now. You can see there on the bottom of your screen, the Meteorologist Q&A has been activated. We're tapping into Facebook pages across the southeastern United States especially. So use hashtag HeyHank. You see underneath his name there on the right side of your screen, hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyAmanda with your comment. Put it up here on screen and answer your question here pertaining to, of course, Tropical Storm Fred. Anything you want to add real quick there, Hank, before we start taking some questions here? Anything that you noted in Amanda's forecast here as far as what we're getting this morning from the NHC?
Not really. I mean, obviously she covered it pretty well. The one thing I would note is that they've had that west-northwest movement on it over the past few updates here. And if you look at the coordinates, it was 18.2 at 5 a.m. and then the 7 a.m. or at least 8 a.m. Eastern time update comes out and it's 18 north. So to me, that would indicate that it's actually moved a little bit south, which would sort of contradict that west-northwest movement. So I think the biggest thing here really, even though all the models are grouped right up around that Tallahassee area, and Amanda mentioned the potential for it to shift west, I think that's a higher potential than maybe an eastward shift here, simply because the disorganization of this thing, it even looks like it's drifting a little bit more south at this point. It's only a very small, 0.2 of a degree. Latitude obviously is very small, but it sort of goes against that motion that they have on that. And so that's what we'll have to watch for very closely, I think, over the next few days. At the very least, maybe it moves a little bit farther west through the Florida Straits, stays over the open water. And look, at the end of the day, and she mentioned the forecast intensities are always tricky. I mean, we're in mid-August and we have a phase in the atmosphere. Not to get too technical, it's the MJO, but it's a situation that we were at last year where this is in a favorable phase for development. So, even though there's no forecasting out there calling for any sort of rapid intensification on this, we'll have to see how it looks based on what it looks like coming off the islands, of course, as always. But, if it gets a little farther west from Florida and the Eastern Gulf there, I do think you have a chance to see a hurricane out of this and potentially maybe even a multiple category hurricane there. Just based on the warm waters and that atmospheric scenario that we're in. So I think this is something that everybody really needs to pay attention to closely. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully this stays weak and disorganized, but definitely not out of the question that we see a little bit more development out of this than what's currently forecast.
That weakening in the short term and then that long-term potential strengthening that we could have here. One of the reasons why we're keeping a close eye here on Tropical Storm Fred. Amanda Holly joining us back here in your hurricane headquarters. Hashtag Hey Amanda from Cindy Hauk, asking about Pensacola. The Florida Panhandle here, Amanda, certainly in play.
Yeah, the Florida Panhandle, including Pensacola, we're talking about, Panama Beach up to Tallahassee through the Apalachicola Bay, all in the cone of uncertainty at this point. That's exactly what you see on your screen. So that means, again, the center of Fred could be anywhere within that red shaded area by the time we get to early Monday morning. Kind of hard to see there. 2 a.m. Monday morning is that timestamp. So yeah, if you're in the Florida Panhandle, I would be watching this closely as well, because there's certainly a possibility you could see impacts.
Let's get Hank this next question here from Mark. Again, you can use hashtag Hey Amanda, hashtag Hey Hank, hashtag Hey JB. We'll get to your questions here. We're going to be here live for another about 6 or 7 minutes taking your questions here on Tracking the Tropics. Hank, Mark asking here, hashtag Hey Amanda, does dry air weaken the system as well as possibly turning it more westerly? Is the question.
That's an interesting question. It certainly does weaken it, but as we talk a lot of times on this show, weaker systems typically don't necessarily respond that well to the steering currents in the atmosphere. If you have a storm with a well-developed core, strong ridge of high pressure, it's going to latch on to the flow around that high and pretty much ride that all the way around. Weaker systems, they don't really have necessarily a lot to latch onto. So you could have a flow in the atmosphere, but if there's not really that good of a system there, it's going to have a hard time latching onto those steering currents. So I do think that's one of the reasons why we could see this drift a little bit farther west. And again, the tracks don't indicate that at this point in terms of the spaghetti models or the global models of the Hurricane Center, but weaker systems just tend to drift a little more. So that's why sort of caution everybody against just following that center line right where it is right now.
We got a lot of questions coming in here. Again, you can use hashtag Hey Hank, hashtag Hey Amanda, hashtag Hey JB. We'll get to your questions here on Tracking the Tropics. Of course, here in your hurricane headquarters where Amanda and I are located, we're here in Tampa, Florida. A lot of questions coming in pertaining to Tampa, including from Kelly here, hashtag Hey Amanda. What about Tampa?
Hey, Kelly, thanks for your question there. Yeah, we're watching this closely here in the Max Defender Rate Weather Center. We've been watching it for the past several days, and at this point, I would plan for some tropical squally weather, especially during the day on Sunday. If the center that we keep talking about there stays a little bit closer to the shoreline, maybe even on the coast, we're not going to be talking about a very strong system, so that's some good news. But if it stays a little bit farther offshore, kind of like an Eta-Elsa situation, we could be talking about a strong tropical storm, potentially a weak Category 1 storm, where we would see some stronger tropical storm bands come through with some gusty winds. We'll obviously be talking about an isolated tornado threat. We would be on that eastern side of the storm. So all of those things we'll have to plan for as we head through the next couple of days. And it's really, like Hank said, the wobbles, we're going to have to watch for those, because those are going to make a big difference in the long run of where the center of Fred kind of ends up.
We got a 2-for-1 here on this next one. Jada here will put you both up here on screen for this one. Jada here asking, hashtag Hey Hank, does it have a chance of forming into a hurricane? And then Chris Aaron here, hashtag Hey Amanda, Hank, JB. So is it possible, if things happen that Hank says, could we see a Category 2? So is a Cat 1, a Cat 2 hurricane in play? I know it's pretty early on in this process, but these are some of the questions we have coming in here at this moment.
I'll just say that it's August. This is the time of the year that we see the strong storms start to form and really come into play. And the 61% of all named storms form between August and September. And typically we see the stronger storms because the waters are so warm, right, Hank?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's completely in play to get a Category 1. Of course, it's always going to depend on what it looks like coming after Cuba. But if you have any sort of low-level, well-defined center that comes north of Cuba, and it's even a little bit west of that current centerline track where it's a little bit farther offshore from the Florida Peninsula, I mean, I'd almost be surprised if it did not jump up to a Category 1. And then at that point, I mean, we've seen storms go from tropical storm to major storms in 2 or 3 days. Not that we're necessarily expecting that with this one, but as you said, it's August. It's a system in the Gulf. You've got that phase in the atmosphere. So if you have a system that's still intact after Cuba and over the water, I would expect a Category 1 at this point and wouldn't be surprised to see something higher.
Harkening back to previous seasons here on Tracking the Tropics, remember the rapid intensification, always possible here. One of the weather terms randomly we'll see trending on Twitter. Let's get to, I don't really know if I follow this question here from Pablo. Maybe you guys can help me make some sense of this, but Pablo here asking, hashtag AJB, if it goes under Cuba, will it come here? Well, I guess what Pablo is asking is if there's a chance that it treks south of Cuba, could it still impact the United States? What do you think, Hank?
What would certainly impact the U.S., I would say not the Tampa area, though, depending on where he's from and asking that. If it goes under Cuba, you're headed well west at that point. You're looking much more up towards the Louisiana and Texas coastline. No indication that it goes south of Cuba at this point, but maybe over Cuba could certainly still happen depending on where that center goes. But the farther south it goes in the short term, the farther west that eventual track is going to trend in the long term.
Let's get to this one here from Roseanne joining us here. Hashtag HJB. Are there any northern fronts that may keep it more stationary, or will it be a fast-moving storm? And, we talk about this all the time here on Tracking the Tropics as far as how important a movement speed is for a system and whether or not it's going to strengthen or weaken or how much time it has to strengthen. Timing is so important when it comes to these storms, as is speed. So here you see on your screen, Amanda, movement at 16 miles per hour. Is it expected to speed up or slow down?
Well, in the near term, it looks like it's going to stay pretty much steady as we head through Friday, and then as we get into the weekend, may actually see some forward motion pick up here just by eyeballing the lines here on the track. That's why we put the timestamps on there, so you could get a good idea of where the center of the storm could be at that particular time frame. And looks like it could be near the Tampa Bay area late Saturday and into early Sunday morning, and then by the time we get to about 24 hours from there, 2 a.m. Monday morning, the system would be pulling away. So it doesn't look like we have any fronts coming in that would stall it out.
I know that Amanda and I are going to be on here for another 5 or so minutes taking your questions. Hank Allen, though, has to get going for his viewers on WGNO, chief meteorologist there in New Orleans. Hank, any final thoughts here before we let you go?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much as is. That track's been pretty consistent over the past couple of days, but, it's still way out there. So I say we need to watch this very closely over the next few days. And I know all you guys will do that. So it's, nice to be with you as always. We'll catch up.
Hank Allen, of course, catch him on WGNO, chief meteorologist there in New Orleans, and follow him, Hank Allen Weather, on Twitter. Hank, thanks as always for joining us, my friend. All right, back here, everybody, in your hurricane headquarters. JB Biunno, Amanda Holly here with you. Let's get to this question that just came in a short time ago, and make sure I have this right here from Michelle Marie Evans. Hashtag, hey, Amanda, could this be another Elsa situation?
Very much so. I think Elsa and Ada would be good comparisons with the current track, with the current thinking. And that would be, not a terrible situation for the Tampa Bay area. Elsa was not as much of an impact as Ada was, even though they were very similar storms because of the timing differences. Ada came through, again, that was the storm that came through late in hurricane season last year and brought a good amount of storm surge flooding to the Tampa Bay area. It was all about timing. It coincided with the highest tides of that day, and that's why we got the storm surge. It was just all about the timing. Elsa didn't really coincide with those high tides, so we didn't worry too much about that storm surge. We ended up getting lucky with that one. But again, weak Category 1 tropical storm, strong tropical storm, not out of the question as it moves by the Tampa Bay area. The one good thing, if the center stays a little bit closer to our coastline, yes, we'll see more impacts, but the storm would likely stay a little bit weaker because it is going to have that land interaction on the eastern side, the peninsula of Florida. So that's good news. But if it stays a little bit farther to the west, like Hank was suggesting, and that's certainly still a possibility, the storm would likely be a little bit weaker because more of the showers and storms, more of the storm itself would actually be over those really warm waters. And as we all know, that's what fuels the storms.
We have another storm comparison question here from this one from Brian Walker. Hashtag, hey, JB. Could Tropical Storm Fred turn into something like Charlie? How warm are the waters? Hurricane Charlie, of course, back in 2004. Big difference between Charlie and what we're looking at here with Fred. Is Charlie Category 4 major hurricane there in 2004. And, it's interesting, back to Pablo's comment that we had here earlier, Charlie was a storm that trekked south of Cuba and then hooked around and hit dead square in the center of the Florida Peninsula. So a little bit of a different trek as far as the system.
Yeah, atmospheric setups are a little bit different here. Notice how none of the models are suggesting a hard right curve with Fred at all. So that's some good news. Not expecting this to be like a Charlie situation again. The waters are warm, but I'll note that, we've gotten a lot of rain here in the past week, 2 weeks here in the Tampa Bay area, and that hasn't just been over land. That has also been out in the Gulf of Mexico, which has actually helped to bring down those water temperatures just a touch, which makes a difference here. So that's some good news. We typically, before we've gotten all of this rain in the past few weeks, we were in the low to mid 90s with some of those water temperatures. Now it looks like we're steadying in the mid to upper 80s and even some, yes, low 90s right along the coastline. So that's some good news. But the waters are warm, still plenty warm enough for strengthening. And yes, as Hank and I and JB have been talking about, a Category 1 storm, even a Category 2, not out of the question. The intensity forecasts are notoriously hard to predict, especially when you have all of the factors at play. I mean, we're talking about dry air, we're talking about wind shear, we're talking about an upper level low pressure sitting over the state of Florida right now. We're talking about those warm waters and a little bit of shear here and there. So all of the factors at play play into the intensity forecast. And right now, they look like it'll keep it on the weaker side, but going forward, of course, we know things can change.
Let's focus on what we have here, right here in the center of your screen. Can you go back one click here?
I can.
If we can, and I want to kind of focus in here on Cuba for a second, because as we look here at this track, right? Okay, so there it is, 2 a.m. Thursday. If the track stays north of Cuba and it's staying over water, there's more elements at play here that could lead this to maybe reaching Cat 1 or even maybe Cat 2 status as far as this. But if it treks south and it has all that land interaction with Cuba, Amanda, this is probably, we're talking about a much weaker system when it gets to the United States.
Yeah, keep in mind, I mean, look to the right a little bit there where it says 2 a.m. Thursday. See how it has an L? That's because it's not even expected to be a tropical storm emerging on the other side of the island of Hispaniola. That's good news because a weaker storm, more disorganized, it's going to take more time for it to reorganize back into that tropical storm, get that low-level center organized again, and then continue on. So all of that takes time, and the more disorganized it appears after Hispaniola, the longer it's going to take to reorganize. If it takes a track farther to the south, where we're seeing more land interaction, well, that's just going to take longer, even longer for it to reorganize, if it even does, because if it continues to experience the mountainous terrain, again, starting with Hispaniola and then the mountains over Cuba, then it's really going to have a very difficult time reorganizing. In the long run, that's good for us, but right now I think that we're probably going to see a little bit to the north of it, which would allow it to at least maintain that tropical storm strength.
This is the last call for your questions and comments on this 8 a.m. edition Eastern Time of Tracking the Tropics here this Wednesday, August 11th. 2021, the 2021 hurricane season here, the Atlantic hurricane season, of course, that we are following here this season on Tracking the Tropics. You can use hashtag #HeyAmanda, hashtag #HeyJB for your questions and comments. We can get to your questions and comments out of the Facebook Live comment section. Chief meteorologist at WGNO, Hank Allen, had to move on to his morning broadcast there in New Orleans. So it's Amanda and I kind of wrapping up here to answer the final questions that are coming in. Again, use one of those hashtags and we can animate your comment here on screen like Jonathan's here. Hashtag #HeyJB. What do you think this will get to storm-wise? Cat 1, Cat 5, and let's just kind of throw this out there, Amanda. There's no chance of this becoming a major, hurricane, especially a Category 5 storm here. Of course, we do have elements here that could be at play as far as intensification, but never really is there.
So right now it's not expected to become a Cat 5. Listen, I never say never in the tropics because it's August.
Never, right. And I made the mistake of letting the word never slip there.
So
never say
I just
never.
wanted to clarify that just a little bit.
The other
Never
JB
say
usually
never.
says never say never, but I'm going to say
chances are very low at this point with all the forecast models and the way that they have the center of Fred interacting with the islands, with the peninsula of Florida and the upper level low pressure, the dry air. All of those things are going to inhibit that strengthening. But again, as Hank mentioned, rapid intensification, it does have, there are some factors at play for the storm to intensify as it makes its way into the Gulf. If that storm is on the very left side of that track where it says 2 a.m. Sunday, 50 miles per hour, if the center of that storm is right where those words are, there's a much higher likelihood that we're going to be talking about a stronger storm than just a tropical storm.
Never say never, but the chances of this being a major Cat 3, Cat 4, Cat 5 storm are significantly lower
than maybe a Cat 1, even a Cat 2.
Right. All right, next question here from Steve, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier on. Hashtag #HeyJB, hashtag #HeyAmanda. Is there any system behind Fred? And so although we don't have a system behind Fred, there is something, of course, that we are monitoring out there a little bit closer to Africa.
Yeah, another tropical wave came off the coast, so I have Fred kind of flashing there almost in the center of your screen, and then if you look to the far right of your screen, there's a flashing bubble that says watching. It's not an invest yet. The National Hurricane Center hasn't deemed it anything that we need current models on, those spaghetti models. That's what that invest means. We just get some more information on it. But it is a vigorous tropical wave. The National Hurricane Center giving it a 40% chance of developing in the next 5 days. And we are talking about the atmospheric pattern more favorable for several more of these to come off the coast of Africa within the next couple of weeks. It's just an overall kind of what we call a teleconnection. It's an atmospheric teleconnection. And it's a little bit more favorable right now. They run in two-week phases. It's a little bit more favorable right now for us to see a couple more of these come off the coast. We'll be watching for it, but the main concern at this point is Fred.
Fred, of course, we're going to continue to monitor here in your hurricane headquarters here on Tracking the Tropics. Meteorologist Amanda Holly here with us at WFLA. Of course, you'll see here on WFLA coming up here in a couple of hours here on your NBC station here in Tampa Bay, Florida. Of course, Tracking the Tropics, our team made up of some of the best meteorologists across the southeastern United States, really across the country, that join us here from their respective newsrooms and their respective weather centers across our country. And great to have them here. Great to have, of course, Chief Meteorologist WGNO Hank Allen on the program. We're going to have more meteorologists coming up here in our subsequent editions here of Tracking the Tropics here in the hours and days ahead as we continue to monitor Tropical Storm Fred. Our regular Wednesday episode coming up here in a few hours. Wednesdays at 2 o'clock is when we normally stream, whether or not we have storms to track or not. Always talking about tropics education, tropics preparation, tropics awareness, all the things to, of course, monitor what we follow here, of course, in your hurricane headquarters as far as tropical development here during the Atlantic hurricane season. So Wednesdays at 2 o'clock, our normal episode, and that's coming up here in just a few hours. That will be the next live stream that we have here for you here on Tracking the Tropics. It'll be meteorologist Amanda Holly, myself, others here, and of course, you can click on the link in the Facebook description on this video, or if you're joining us from elsewhere, another social media platform, click on the link. It'll take you over to the respective television station's website where you can read more about the very latest here on Tropical Storm Fred. Folks, we'll see you at 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central for our next edition of Tracking the Tropics.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.